In December 1999, RadioShack stock closed at $117.75 a share. The company operated more than 8,000 stores across 30 countries, employed over 40,000 people, and pulled in $4.13 billion in annual revenue. 94% of all Americans, by the company's own accounting, lived or worked within 5 minutes of a RadioShack. Millions of them carried a Battery of the Month Club card in their wallets, a free slip of cardboard good for one Enercell battery every 30 days, just for walking through the door. On February 2nd, 2015, that stock traded at 9 cents. The company was delisted, declared bankrupt, and sold at auction for $26.2 million. This is the story between those two numbers. You are watching American Electronics and Tech, where we take apart the companies that wired the electronic world, down to the last resistor and the engineer who soldered it. If that is your kind of story, subscribe and hit like, because the rise here stretches across 8 decades, and the fall happened in less than 1. Now, this story begins not in Fort Worth, but in a Boston basement. In 1921, 2 brothers from London, Theodore and Milton Deutschmann, opened a retail and mail order shop at 46 Brattle Street in downtown Boston. The space was a basement, roughly 7,000 cubic feet, rented for $50 a month. They sold surplus military radio gear, vacuum tubes, coils, and components for the amateur operators building their own rigs at kitchen tables across New England. An employee named Bill Halligan suggested the name RadioShack, borrowed from the wooden structure aboard ships that housed the radio equipment. Halligan later founded the Hallicrafters Company. The Deutschmanns would not. Their business survived the Depression, published its first catalog in 1939, and by the early 1960s had grown to 9 stores. Then the money ran out. RadioShack was carrying $800,000 in uncollectible debts and losing $4 million a year. Nobody in Boston could save it, but somebody in Fort Worth was paying attention. Charles David Tandy was the son of a Fort Worth leather goods dealer. His father, Dave Tandy, and a partner named Norton Hinckley had founded the Hinckley-Tandy Leather Company in 1919, selling shoe soles and heels to Texas repair shops. Charles grew up cutting leather and learning retail. After Navy service in World War II, he took over the family business, expanded into hobby crafts, and by the late 1950s controlled over 100 stores. In 1963, he bought RadioShack for roughly $300,000. 9 stores, $4 million in losses, $800,000 in bad debts. Tandy killed the mail order catalog, slashed the inventory, replaced name brands with private label goods from his own factories, and opened small neighborhood stores staffed by people who actually understood a circuit board. His philosophy was blunt. We're not looking for the guy who wants to spend his entire paycheck on a sound system. Within 2 years, RadioShack turned a profit. The growth that followed was methodical and relentless. Tandy required every store manager to take an ownership stake, tying their income directly to the register. He launched the Battery of the Month Club, the simplest retail idea in the history of electronics. 1 free battery every month for anyone who walked in with a card. The cost to the company was almost nothing. The return was a customer walking past the components wall, the scanners, the soldering kits, 12 times a year. From 9 stores in 1963, the chain grew past 130 by 1969. By the mid-1970s, fueled by the Citizens Band radio craze, that number climbed past 4,600. The realistic brand CB radios dominated the market, and at the peak of the boom, CB sales alone accounted for nearly 30% of the company's revenue. Then, on November 4th, 1978, Charles Tandy died of a heart attack. He was 60 years old. Philip North, his childhood friend and administrative assistant, stepped in as interim chief executive. North once told Fortune magazine that all he knew about electronics was that the funny end of the battery goes into the flashlight first. The company mourned. The company continued. But before Tandy died, two men in the back of a RadioShack office had already built something the executives did not believe in. Don French was a buyer at RadioShack who had purchased a hobbyist computer kit, built it himself, and sketched his own crude prototype at his desk. His design did not impress John Roach, the vice president of manufacturing, but the idea of selling a personal computer did. In November 1976, Roach and French hired Steve Leininger, a 24-year-old engineer from National Semiconductor and a member of the Homebrew Computer Club in Palo Alto, the same club that counted Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak among its ranks. Leininger designed the machine. Total development cost came in under $100,000. When French and Leininger told management the computer could sell 50,000 units, Louis Kornfeld, the president of RadioShack, said that if he gave one to his wife for Christmas, she would think he was some kind of nut. Roach's response to the estimate was, by his own later admission, unprintable. Charles Tandy approved production of 3,500 units, one per store, figuring they could be used for inventory if nobody bought one. The company's faith was always in selling things, not in the people who might build with them. On August 3, 1977, at a press conference at the Warwick Hotel in Manhattan, RadioShack announced the TRS-80 microcomputer system, $599.95 for a complete package, a keyboard, 12-inch monitor, cassette recorder, and 4 kilobytes of RAM running on a Zilog Z80 processor. Within days, over 15,000 people called to order one, and the switchboard collapsed. 10,000 units sold in the first month. By the end of 1978, the TRS-80 had captured roughly half of all personal computer sales in the United States, outselling Apple and Commodore combined. Byte magazine called it one-third of the 1977 Trinity, the three machines that brought computing into the American living room. RadioShack's advantage was not the chip, it was the counter. Apple had a handful of dealers. Commodore was still hunting for shelf space. RadioShack had over 3,500 stores, and every one of them could hand you a TRS-80 and explain how to plug it in. The TRS-80 line did not stop at one machine. In 1979, Tandy released the Model 2, built for small businesses that needed faster processing and real disk storage instead of cassette tape. The color computer followed in 1980, opening the line to budget-conscious homebuyers. And the Model 3 arrived the same year, folding the monitor and disk drive into a single housing, and finally, fixing the static and tape errors that had plagued early Model 1 owners. By 1981, InfoWorld was calling RadioShack the dominant supplier of small computers in America. Still, serious business buyers hesitated to put a computer next to a CB radio and a remote control car, so Roach built them a separate showroom. Specialized RadioShack computer centers, staffed for service and support rather than walk-in sales, grew to 500 locations by 1984 and earned a Hall of Fame award from Consumer's Digest the year after. The company that almost laughed off Don French's hobby project now ran a second chain, just to sell more of it. By the early 1980s, RadioShack was the single largest retailer of consumer electronics on the planet. Over 4,300 company-owned stores and more than 2,000 dealers carried the name. The Tandy Center in downtown Fort Worth housed the headquarters in twin 20-story towers, connected by a mall with an indoor ice rink and a privately owned subway, the only one in the United States. Gross margins topped 50%. 60 employees had become millionaires through the stock plan. The Realistic brand carried the shelves. Realistic stereo receivers and shortwave radios were how a generation of Americans heard frequencies they could not otherwise reach. The Flavor-Radio, a simple AM radio in candy-colored shells, stayed in the catalog from 1972 to 2000. And below the counters sat the resistors, the capacitors, the 75-in-1 electronics kits that taught a 12-year-old to build a working receiver on a rainy Saturday. The RadioShack catalog was not a product list. It was a curriculum, but the seed of the ending was already visible. The TRS-80 ran on a closed software ecosystem. As applications poured out for Apple and IBM-compatible machines, fewer serious users would accept software written exclusively for RadioShack hardware. Enthusiasts gave it a nickname that stuck, the Trash 88T. In 1983, Tandy released the Model 2000, a machine 3 times faster than the IBM PC. It did not sell. It could not run half of IBM's available software. By 1993, Tandy exited the personal computer business entirely, selling its manufacturing assets to AST Research. The company that had put a computer on every RadioShack counter decided that computers were someone else's problem. That decision looked like pruning at the time. It was amputation. What replaced the computer was the wireless phone. Through the 1990s, RadioShack pivoted hard towards cellular, partnering with Sprint, Singular, and Verizon. In 2005, the company sold more mobile phones than Walmart, Circuit City, and Best Buy combined. The revenue looked healthy on a spreadsheet, but the transformation was hollow. The components wall shrank. The parts drawers emptied. The store that once taught you to build a radio now wanted you to sign a 2-year phone contract. You can read that pivot 2 ways, and honest history requires holding both. From one angle, wireless was a rational pursuit of the last margin business available in physical electronics retail. From another, it was the final abandonment of the identity that had made RadioShack the only store of its kind. The hobbyist, the tinkerer, the kid with the soldering iron, they stopped coming in. And when Amazon arrived and the smartphone made the wireless counter redundant, RadioShack had nothing left. It had abandoned the community that made it different. It had emptied the parts drawers that made it useful. It had traded the one identity no competitor could copy for a wireless counter that any strip mall could replicate. By the time management understood what they had given up, there was nobody left who remembered how to get it back. The numbers tell the rest, and they tell it fast. 11 consecutive quarterly losses. 500 stores closed in 2006. That same year, 400 employees at the Fort Worth headquarters received an email on a Tuesday morning. The workforce reduction notification is currently in progress. Unfortunately, your position is one that has been eliminated. A management professor at the University of North Texas told reporters he had never heard of that many people being terminated electronically. The company that Charles Tandy built by requiring every manager to own a piece of the store had become a company that could not look its people in the eye to tell them they were gone. The stock fell. The stores closed. The debts mounted. RadioShack filed for Chapter 11 on February 5, 2015, and immediately listed 1,784 stores for closure. In May, the company's assets were purchased by a hedge fund subsidiary called General Wireless for $26.2 million. A second bankruptcy followed in March 2017. A company that had operated 8,000 stores and generated $4 billion in annual revenue sold for less than the price of the riverfront headquarters it had built in Fort Worth a decade earlier. The name passed to a brand management firm, and then to another, and then to another. What survives is not the company. Working TRS-80s still boot in collectors' workshops and vintage computing clubs. Retro computing communities write new software for the Z80 processor, nearly 50 years after Steve Leininger chose the chip. Don French and Steve Leininger, the true fathers of the TRS-80, are remembered in those communities even if the official histories credited the executives who fought the project. Realistic Minimus 7 speakers sell for more today than they cost new in 1981. The old catalogs, every issue from 1939 forward, have been scanned and archived online and are browsed with quiet reverence. The Tandy Center Towers still stand in downtown Fort Worth, renamed City Place, the RadioShack name stripped from the glass. A few hundred franchise stores remain. The brand belongs to the Unicomer Group out of El Salvador and exists primarily as a website, but the real verdict was always in the parts drawers. Every engineer who learned to solder under a RadioShack magnifying lamp carries that store in their hands. Somewhere in a kitchen drawer in a house that has been remodeled twice since the 1980s, there is a Battery of the Month Club card. It is small enough to fit behind a driver's license and expired by 3 decades. It represents something no algorithm, no fulfillment warehouse, no 2-day shipping promise has ever replaced. The guarantee that a store on your block knew your name, carried the part you needed, and would give you something for free just for showing up. RadioShack did not lose to the future. It trained the future, stocked its workbench, sold it batteries 1 free month at a time, and the future did not come back. If you ever walked into a RadioShack, carried a Battery of the Month card, or typed your first line of BASIC on a TRS-80, drop a comment below. Tell us the store, the city, the product, and whether it still powers on. The people who soldered those circuits and built those kits know more about what was lost than the people who sold the name. Subscribe, because this archive is still growing. We have the story of another American electronics empire coming next, and you will not want to miss how it ends.